Hello, Tom the Tale Teller here. Thank you very much for coming back to watch one of my videos and to hear a story. And today I'm going to bring you a story from one of my books. I've collected folk tales from around my local area and put them into Leicestershire folk tales for children. And then my second book were folk tales that I collected from around the country, from Scotland down through England and Wales and down to the south coast. And that is forest folk tales. I work in the middle of the National Forest at a place called Moira Furnace. If you've never been, go and check it out when all this is over. It's a great place to go and explore the National Forest. And so the History Press, who published these books, thought I was ideally placed to write these stories. Now the story I'm going to bring you today is a story from Scotland. The way this book is made up is each chapter is an area. So it might be Scotland, it might be Yorkshire, it might be the North Wales, it might be the Forest of Dean, it might be the New Forest, so on and so forth. And for each one of those I found there were stories of one thing or another. For example, North Wales. First thing you think of is dragons, and there were plenty of dragon stories in those North Walian forests. And did you know the North Walian forests are classed as rainforests due to the amount of rain they get? Now in Scotland, understandably, the Scottish stories tended to focus around fairies. Fairies are very common in Scottish folklore. And so my chapter, my book for the Scottish forests, focus on fairy stories. But the fair folk, they're not like Tinkerbell. No, they're far more mischievous, and you have to treat them well, otherwise bad things can happen. And my chapter starts with a poem, which I'm going to read to you now. And then the story I'll tell. I'm not going to read, I'm going to tell. Which means it'll be different to the way it's written in my book. Which is the beauty of storytelling. Fair the fairy folk they be, dancing around the ancient tree, singing songs of them and thee, but never will they let you see. Heed my words, stay away, let the fair folk at their play. Life will be better, this I say, if you walk away this day. But if you must, or if you need, talk to them, then this please heed. Please be sure that your deed be one of kindness, and not greed. For then the fairies will be kind, and hold thee with great regard in mind. The rest of your life you will find the bad times are well left behind. And so my story starts with a man called John Smith, a very unassuming plain name for a very unassuming plain man. He lives in a house on the edge of the forests in Scotland, and he lives with his wife, his son and his daughter. And every day he will travel through the forest to the far side where he worked for a farmer. Now one day the farmer said to the man, said to John, he said that it needed some peat. He said that it needed peat cutting and drying, for it was the middle of summer, perfect time to dry out peat. Peat was ideal to burn on your fire during the winter, and he told John to go up to Merlin's Craig. Merlin's Craig, John Smith had heard of this. You see, it was a very strange place. It was said to be inhabited by those fair folk, those magic users themselves. And it's said that it got its name from the great wizard who visited it many, many years ago. And John said no, he couldn't go up there to cut the peat from the Merlin's Craig, for strange things would surely happen. But the farmer said he had a choice. He could go up there and do it and get paid, or he could not, and he wouldn't get paid, and then he wouldn't feed his family. And so it was a simple choice. Off John went, up and up and up to the moorland, up to the peat bogs, high above the forests. He looked down and he could see the pine forest stretching as far as the eye could see. He could make out his home in a clearing on the far side. He could make out the farm where he worked. And he took that shovel that he had with him and he sunk it into the peat next to a great monolithic stone that rose out of the ground. He sunk it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and he twisted and turned the great sod of soil up. The peat sat belly up, baking in the sun. He was about to do the same again and again and again to cut these peat bricks, but out from behind the stone came a little woman. She stood half the height of a normal woman. She had crazy red hair and a wild look in her eyes. And she said to John, she said, "You put our roof back. Okay, you put our roof back." John knew her for what she was. An angry fairy, one of the fair folk. This was clearly the roof of a fairy dwelling, and he was removing that from their house. And so he apologised. He said, I'm really sorry, I did not mean to upset you. And she said, if you come back again, she said, if you come back again and try to do this, then bad things will happen to you, John Smith. I know you, bad things will happen to you. Okay, so they will. And so John carefully returned the sod of peat back to the hole. The fairy vanished into thin air, or so it seemed. And John went back down to the farm, and he told the farmer what had happened. And the farmer nodded his head and then said, "Nonsense, poppycock, get back up there, so you will, and do that peat. I need that for the winter." John had no choice. He did it and got paid. He didn't do it, didn't get paid. His family didn't eat. Well, off he went with his shovel back up to Merlin's Craig, and he started to dig. He dug the first one out once more, then the second and the third and the fourth, and he worked and he worked and he worked. But nothing. No fairies. Nothing. He worked all day till the sun had rose and began to set, and he had a whole yard full of peat bricks upturned, baking in the summer sun. Well, he was proud of his work. It was a lot of digging, a lot of hard work. And so he went back down to the farm, and he started to believe that the fairy folk were just in his head. He'd just seen things. The farmer congratulated him for a good day's work and gave him a jug of milk. This was a bit of a bonus, fresh from the cow. And John decided he would take a bit of a shortcut. He would not walk round Merlin's Craig through the forest. It was a fair night. He would go up and see his work once more. He would go up and over Merlin's Craig and down. It was a lovely walk. And he walked and he walked and he walked up to where he saw the peat in bricks turned to bake in the sun. And there, next to the great monolith rock, he stopped for a brief second because he thought, could that be? He listened. Was it? It was music. It was singing. And then out of the ground, out of a great hole in the ground they came. Fairy after fairy after fairy, and they danced and they sang and they sang and they danced. John put the jug of milk down and he joined in the great party the fairy folk were having. And they danced round and round, and his head spun and spun and spun, and then they led him with the jug of milk into the great hole beneath the monolithic stone. In he went, and he saw a vast city under the ground where the fair folk lived, and he wondered and he marvelled and he marvelled and he wondered. And after spending some time there, he said his goodbyes, and the fairy folk lifted the enchantment from him and they let him go. He walked out from the fairyland, and he walked down from Merlin's Craig through the forest to the clearing where his house was, carrying that milk, still fresh as the moment it came out the cow. And he walked into his house and, "Honey, I'm hot." "Honey?" A look of sheer shock and horror fell upon her face. It can't be. It can't be, she cried. And then into the room came two young adults, a man and a woman, and their mouths dropped. No, it can't be. But you're gone. You're dead. You see, my friends, John had not been away for a day. You've been away for 7 years. Yes, 7 years dancing in the fairy city. See, time is different with the fair folk. He was down there for as long as it took for the grass and the peat and the moss to grow back upon the roof of the fair folk's home as punishment. But you see, the milk was still fresh. Magic and enchantment had fallen upon him. And there sat his wife, looking about 7 years older. And this man and this woman, these young adults, turned out to be his son and his daughter. He'd missed out on 7 years of their life, and they'd gone from children to adults. And he sat and he wept and he wept and he wept. And so it is, my friends, a little word of warning to you. If a fair folk gives you warning, if a fairy comes and tells you to stop doing something, then please heed their warning. For you do not want to be losing 7 years of your life just for ignoring the fair folk. And with that story of fairies ringing in your head, I would kindly ask, if you like what you see today, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe considering clicking on the subscribe button. There might be a subscribe orb appear somewhere here or here, depending on which side I put it. Check out one of my videos. It might be here or here. Check out my playlist. There's lots to see. And a massive mention to all the wonderful stuff that's going on on Facebook. The World Storytelling Cafe community have been set up. 1,000 people have subscribed now, and they're sharing stories all the time from storytellers. A modern Decameron, which is Decameron is the book written by an Italian author about 10 people sharing stories in a villa to see out the Black Death, and they sit down, they share 10 stories for 10 days, and that's going on at the moment. 10 storytellers for 10 each day for 10 days, different stories being shared. So if you like stories, there's so much out there. Check out the wondrous world of storytelling. Don't forget, my book is on sale. You can get it directly through me or go via the History Press or Amazon. And so is Leicestershire Folktales. I will leave it there. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon for another story. Stay safe, stay healthy. Goodbye.